Right then, we're just doing another video, and this is another in the series of videos that I'm doing whilst we're under lockdown. The reason I'm doing them, basically, apart from alleviating a bit of boredom, is basically pretty much all our videos are road tests of cars, which are for the benefit of people who are hoping to come and see them, but hopefully we can then give them a bit of confidence to come. So we're going through the mechanical things on the car, and I do talk about the cars to some degree, but this gives me an opportunity to go through different types of Hondas that we have, that I can then give my thoughts and, you know, a kind of review, I guess, of the vehicle. It's not particularly serious, it's just a bit of fun, really. As I say in the others, it is possibly a bit self-indulgent, but I just thought if it could be of any help to anybody, then that's why we do it. So what I'm driving today, this is a 2015 Honda CR-V, and it's a 1.6 diesel automatic. This happens to be an EX version, so it's a top of the range car, and this, with the 1.6, this was part of the facelift in 2015, where they revised the exterior. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but I find them quite a handsome car. It's what me and my wife drive, or she drives particularly. Externally, I kind of leave that alone for the time being. This is more about how the car drives, but also I'll talk about possibly the interior of the car a little bit as well. So looking around inside, the reason we get on with the CR-Vs, I've got to be honest with you, is the fact that basically, like a lot of people, we're not chasing the fashion of SUVs. It just happens to be a really practical car, but one that ticks a couple of other boxes. I think it looks very smart in certain specs, and we tend to go for the EX versions, but also one, say, amazingly practical. They're nice to look at, but they're nice to sit in, and they're nice to drive, and that's pretty much why we do it. So that's why we buy them. They're also, you know, very, very reliable. But I will, if I remember, try and talk about some of the things you may want to look for on a CR-V a little bit later in the video. But coming inside, first and foremost, I mean, the room inside them is, you know, there's a lot of room in these cars, you know, front and rear. It's one of the few cars where you can actually have 5 adults in the car actually quite comfortably, 4 very comfortably. I'm 6 foot tall. If anyone's 6 foot tall and goes behind me, they'll have plenty of leg room and plenty of headroom. And a huge boot to go with it. The front seats here, very comfortable, very well padded. So it's very easy to get comfortable in the vehicle. And even over the longer trips, you don't get too much of a sort of a numb backside, which you can get in certain cars. What I like about them, and particularly my wife likes, is the fact that they're very easy to place on the road. You've got lots of visibility, big wing mirrors there to give you a nice view to the back of the car. And I can actually place it slightly better in terms of parking than, say, something like a Civic or an Accord that we sell, because where the back of the car is kind of where the back of the car is. But most CR-Vs you'll find will have parking sensors, pretty much all will have parking cameras, so it isn't much of an issue in all honesty. Inside the car, it's, as with all Hondas, I mean, they are very, very well built cars. And this is actually quite a horrible bit of road, which is why I tend to talk about it at this point, because it resonates, and so if it's got rattles, it'll show up. But you generally don't really get them on the CR-Vs. The only rattles you normally get, there's 2 which crop up on occasion. One on the passenger side rear seat, and it's a really easy fix. It's the wider part. They're on a 60-40 split. The 60% one moves a bit on the little latch behind. So basically get a bit of insulation tape and wrap it round the little hook that the seat latches onto, and it gets rid of it for quite a few months, and you may have to do it again, but it's very simple indeed. Or you can try grease, but I find tape works much better. And another little one just by my kneecap here, there's a little plastic shroud that goes around under the dashboard. Occasionally at certain revs on certain ones you sometimes get a little bit of a sort of buzz from those, but if you just pull them gently with your fingertips, they kind of come away from whatever they're close to, and that's it. I mean, they don't really make any noise. They're very, very well built. And as I say in some other videos, you know, it does frustrate because build quality isn't about, you know, soft squidgy plastics. I mean, there is soft stuff on here, but there's plenty of hard stuff as well. It's about how the manufacturer puts those together against the other bits, and that's where the Hondas are particularly good. Like most of the Japanese, in fairness, Toyota and Lexus equally so, I'd guess. So you do get very few rattles. That the plastics wear very, very well indeed. And I completely understand that some people like to look at, you know, soft squidgy plastics and have a certain feel, but quite often they'll use that as a guide for build quality. It isn't. It's nothing to do with it. And some of the manufacturers, I'm not going to name them, you know, have this reputation for being very well built, but they can be rattle boxes. I mean, I've driven enough of them offered as a part exchange to know what they can be like. The Honda, you know, as I said, very nicely done. It's a simple dashboard. It's quite nice to look at. It's very easy to use. The sat navs, again, pretty straightforward. It's, you know, it's not the quickest one in the world apparently, but I'm used to them. I get on with it absolutely fine. There's slightly fussy stuff. I find the radio a little bit fussy to use, in all honesty, but I only listen to 2 or 3 stations, and once you've preset them, they're in there anyway. The nice bits, the climate control, which is separate from the air conditioning, I really like. Has very nice quality controls with them. The buttons have a lovely quality of actuation, and it all works very, very nicely indeed. The automatics, if you've got a petrol one, you've just got a conventional sort of T-shaped lever which will go up and down to go into drive. This one uses a natty little lever here, which is very nice to operate, very intuitive. It feels very slick in hand. Dashboard, I actually preferred the last generation dashboard to this one. It was very much an old school Honda, a sort of separate rev counter and speedo, equal size on either side. This one's got a bit more going on, which is quite stylish, but to me not quite as easy to read, but it's still, you know, perfectly good. Silly things, steering wheel actually really nice. It's quite small diameter steering wheel, feels good in hand, but also it's got plenty of controls on it, but they're all actually very easy to use. So they become second nature really rather quickly. Although it can initially look a bit daunting, it's actually very, very simple. So coming to the drive, a lot of SUVs rather, they seem to follow the same sort of design philosophy, and that's basically to give you what seems to be quite a soft cushioned ride, which is absolutely fine. But when it comes to corners and tight corners, they tend to have quite a lot of motion going on. So if the corners like this, you get a lot of body roll angle. But with the CR-Vs, you don't. It's very, very, very car-like to drive. The ride it gives you is typically Honda. It's slightly firm, but very, very well done. It's not harsh at all, so firmness isn't harshness. You know, it does get caught out with sharp potholes, but all cars do. But what it does very, very well indeed is kind of flow through corners with very little motion going on. And as I say in our works videos, that, you know, that's particularly important for those that may not be concentrating on the road ahead. So kids in the back, particularly in this day and age with their faces pressed against their iPhones, it can be quite nauseating with a lot of motion going on. And my kids are particularly prone to car sickness, but they don't really get it in the CR-Vs. I loved it, a Land Cruiser, one of the old generation ones in it, was a lollopy thing, but I loved the car. But that really did flounder and flop all over the road. And the kids just couldn't cope with it. You know, half an hour in the car and they were both as green as anything. So we tended not to go too far in that particular car. But the CR-V, as I said, really, really nicely done. I'm just going to check there's something going on here. Going to continue in kind of the car-like theme, the steering of the car on the move when attached to the chassis. I mean, it's a really good section of road to show it off, because it's quite this is sort of a flowing section of road, which is lovely in a sports car actually, but most people in an SUV wouldn't drive it at any great pace, and I'm not going to drive like a hooligan, but it just shows how accomplished these cars are. Minimal input from the steering, it holds its line absolutely brilliantly, and again with such little motion, it's a very, very, very capable chassis, and something that's quite often underplayed by the motoring press. They see them as slightly dull to drive, they see them as not overly exciting, but for goodness sakes, we're talking about an SUV. It's not an S2000 or a sports car, but what it does do, it does very impressively indeed. The engine in this particular car, this is the 1.6 diesel, and this is the higher horsepower version, so it gets best part of 160 horsepower, and it is quite a stonking engine actually. It's got loads of initial thrust, and when you compare it to the old 2.2, it's noticeably quicker. That's the one thing I would say. It really picks up and goes very, very quickly indeed. Revs keenly, relatively quietly. It's probably slightly more vocal at lower speeds and lower RPMs and at idle on the 2.2, because that was a really sweet engine, the old 2.2 i-DTEC. But it's still, it's on the refined side. It's not one of the noisier SUVs out there, far from it. Honda wouldn't allow that. That's certainly the case. And in this particular case, it's now attached or mated to the 9-speed automatic gearbox, and what a gearbox it is. Gear changes are very, very quick indeed, very smooth. It's got so many 9 to choose from. It's not one of those where you're going to be up and down the gearbox and in an annoying fashion. It just happens to change gears so smoothly, respond so keenly that you don't even notice it. You're not counting the gears it's going into, but it matches the gearbox, the engine really, really well, and that's not always the case with diesel engines. They don't always match very happily with automatics, but in this case they've done a very, very, very nice job indeed. So, criticisms, if I'm honest with you, I suppose at motorway speeds and slightly above, probably a bit more wind noise that they could do with sort of tightening that up. They may have done on the later versions. Road noise has always been a bit of a bugbear of Hondas, and it drums up a bit, but it's not noisy. It's not a noisy car at all. But you know that they are sensitive to road surfaces. So if you got on a kind of a sort of, sorry, it's just a motorbike coming at great speed. Kind of this concrete sections, it kind of drones through the car. But on all other surfaces, it is, very, very quiet indeed. Other things, I'm trying to think of anything that sort of is particularly grating. There isn't really. They are very, very good cars to live with. I mean, we've had one, always had a CR-V in the family, probably for the best part of 15 years. Different ones, because we don't keep them very long because we sell them with the company. But they're just they're a really good family car. Things to look for on CR-Vs of this vintage, so let's say from 2012 to 2017, which was the build timescale for these cars. There's not a lot. They're very, very tough indeed. The faults from the previous generation, which I did on another video, by and large been addressed. So the things you may want to look for, I've done on a couple of CR-Vs with much higher mileage than this particular one, which has done 50,000 miles. I've done, I think, 2 wheel bearings, 2 rear wheel bearings. This is over thousands, by the way, so I don't think it's just, there's a handful of a selection. It's many cars, so it's very rare, but you could hear a sort of thrumming noise, and when you steered one way and the other, it quietened and went louder again. Sure enough, it was a wheel bearing gone. So that's something possibly to look for. Mechanically, they're very, very tough indeed. We don't touch gearboxes, we don't touch engines really. They're very, very strong, but obviously just good maintenance is what you need to look for. An annoying weakness of the car, I guess, and it's not a major one, is the rear third brake light. The high level rear brake light is LED, and for some bizarre reason they cost nearly £100 from Honda. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous, really. But you know, they can go to just check it's working. I think, and someone may need to correct me on this, they're referred to as non-obligatory as part of an MOT, or certainly they were, so you might want to check that. So they don't essentially have to work, or they didn't, but say don't take that as gospel. Just sort of check up on the latest on that one. But yeah, frustratingly expensive. Other than that, again, say we really don't have to touch the cars mechanically. They're very strong indeed. Electrically, again, very, very strong. The stuff we do regularly, but it's no fault of the car quite often, is replacement parking sensors on occasion. They're easily done. They're quite expensive, unfortunately. Again, they're probably best part of £100 each. But it's normally where someone's just tapped your car rather than, you know, a failure of the sensor. So those are the things to look for. I mean, there isn't a lot. I'm trying to think of anything else. Vibration from the back on hard lock. Not so much on this generation, the one before, but that was to do with just draining out and flushing the rear diff. It's a cheap and cheerful job. It's less than 50 quid to do. You can even do it yourself. There's 1,000,001 tutorials on YouTube on how to do it, and it sounds horrible. You think you've got a major problem, you haven't. It's very, very simply fixed. So I hope the videos have been some help to you. As always though, if you've got any questions about it, I've got all the time in the world on my hand at the moment for the next few weeks, so feel free to fire away.